Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all this morning to the webinar launch of the Defence Forces Review in 2020. In keeping with the theme of the year, we're joining you live via webinar as opposed to the usual launch which would have taken place in DCU. As is tradition with the Defence Force launch, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Defence Forces Chief of Staff, Admiral Mark Mellett, to officially launch the Defence Forces Review 2020.
Derek, Your Excellency, distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, strategic implications for Irish defence planning in the evolving geopolitical landscape is such a timely undertaking. I was reflecting recently on a paradigm created by General Perkins of the US Training and Doctrinal Centre, where he has made the argument that we're moving from the complicated to the complex operating environment. And the game of checkers and chess are both played on the same board, but the rules are different. And for a long time, armed forces were designed on our checkers-based world outlook, but today we're switching to appreciation. States are changing all over the world with regional competition between states, with the advent of ISIS, with extremist armed elements, organized crime, the growth in narcotics. We also have other vectors that are moving, that are, I suppose, multiplying those challenges with, for instance, declining resources, climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, and growing irregular migration, and significant population increases in some clusters, may double by 2050. We have then technological advances, even allowing our adversaries to adapt to new, quicker ways of capability development. The curve in harnessing those technology advantages. Now, technology advantages bring huge strengths in terms of automation, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, intelligence augmentation, blockchain. It's just such a but it needs to be harnessed within the institutions. We all live in a connected world, and increasingly and every day we feel that what I call the inversion of power, an inversion that actually attacks credibility, legitimacy, and accountability, where a single operator on a keyboard can become a very loud voice in terms of shaping public opinion, driving fake news. We even see today now challenges to NATO's credibility and the worrying developments in particular between Greece and Turkey. Cyber threats are now targeting the individual, they're targeting the state, regional institutions, as well as global targets. And that our forces today are shaping to deal with these largely unknown threats in this new. We're dealing in an environment where we need to be good chess players, and Óglaigh hÉireann is a state security architecture. And when all is said and done, we're part of the bedrock that underpins our sovereignty, part of the framework that provides for the institutions of our civil society. And the civil society is a human right of every man, woman, and child. It's where people are free, where the vulnerable are protected. And it's also where commerce can progress and enterprise can flourish. And that's right, and that's what civilization is about. Its purpose, the Commission on the Future of the Defence Forces, is to look at our global island and to assess the strategic implications for Irish defence planning in the evolving geopolitical landscape. So what a perfect time to have this review and the launch of this review. With 54 abstracts have felt into it, 28 academic peer-reviewed papers with 31 contributors. So just a few thank yous. If I could thank Paul Hegarty for his leadership again in pulling this together, the conductor of the orchestra, but in particular, Professor, could I thank you, the team in DCU, and I want to give a particular thank you to Katrina Dowd, Dr. Katrina Dowd, Professor in DCU, our first co-author, our first female co-author. It's great to see the mix in terms of the contributions, and also the dozen or so reviewers from DCU who added so much in making this such a powerful review. I've already started reading through it, and it's such food for thought in the context of the valuable contributions. I want to also just mention before I close our Defence Forces Public Relations team, Lieutenant Colonel Gavin Young, and also the Defence Forces printing team, who've done such a great job in producing this, Shane Kern and Captain James Mulderick. If I could close, and I'll plagiarise a quote that Gavin Young has already plagiarised from Harry Truman. Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. So I close at that. I know, Paul, have you a small presentation to make there before I call off with a crystal piece for Katrina and her wonderful contribution in terms of her editorial prowess?
Sir, yes, a small gift to present on your behalf. Ordinarily you do this in person, but on this occasion I'll do it on your behalf if that's okay. So Katrina, just on behalf of Chief of Staff Defence Forces, just a small token of appreciation for your assistance this year with the Defence Forces review. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Katrina, thank you very much.
So I go back in. Good morning, everyone. Again, thanks very much to the Chief of Staff for his kind words. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the President of DCU, Professor Derek Keogh.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I mean, the Admiral said at the beginning in terms of where are we located, we're someplace in the cloud, but I hope that you feel the warmth of DCU wherever you are, and know that I look forward to welcome you all here back to DCU, and many of you kind of in the room are graduates. Just a health warning there for Katrina. It is customary that beautiful gifts like that make their way to the President's office, even for a short visit en route to your own home. But congratulations. It's great to see everybody around the room, and as I say, I'm delighted to be able to welcome this marvellous publication. As a historian and editor in my time, I know what it takes to bring together a volume of this type that's both relevant and rigorous. And the two combinations are critical in terms of impact. So congratulations. I'm delighted on behalf of everybody and on behalf of the university to welcome especially the Chief of Staff of Óglaigh and hÉireann, Admiral Mellett. Mark is a great friend of the university and supporter of all that we do, and I was delighted by his typically thought-provoking introduction this morning. I'd also like to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Gavin Young, who's officer in charge of public relations in the Defence Forces. Luckily, there are very strong links between our university and the Defence Forces. And the publication of the Defence Forces Review 2020, again, is a further demonstration of that collaboration, that long-term collaboration. And I'd like to congratulate my colleagues in the School of Law and Government, and also our colleagues who keep us safe in the Defence Forces. The Admiral spoke in his introduction too about the changing nature of international relations, and he, of course, plagiarism is a kind of a theme that doesn't spill into the journal, but for ourselves kind of launching and basking in the glory of our people, we're happy to do that. But the Admiral spoke in his introduction about international relations being complicated and complex. And that's reflected very clearly in the contents of this journal. And I think what it shows very clearly too is the way in which strategy, international relations, diplomacy and security has changed enormously. And even the kind of topics, some of them would have fallen into old school reflections, maybe foreign policy, security policy, maybe peacekeeping, maritime security. But of course, look at the development of the new themes, the cybersecurity, which affects us all, even in terms of our Black Friday shopping. But the big themes, the challenges for us, climate change, nothing is probably bigger in the short term. And the chief highlighted again the importance of gender and gender equality. Academics speak about research, and we tend to divide it into different categories. For some, both terms are a term of praise. We talk about pure research and applied research. And I think that what the review brings together is really an impressive array, as the Admiral said, 31 contributions, an impressive array of scholarship. And so much of it is rooted in first-hand experience in diplomacy or in the kind of military field. I'd like to highlight again that type of strength in the contributors. Sinead Walsh has served as EU Ambassador to South Sudan currently, and Deputy Director General of Irish Aid for Africa. We've got Marcella Smith, for instance, who's Deputy Director International Security Policy at the Department of Foreign Affairs. And Aoife Lyons, who's Deputy Director of Conflict Resolution at the Department of Foreign Affairs. And we're very pleased to see around the table Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Finland to Ireland. So you're very welcome, Excellency. And from, I suppose, our side of the table, again, we have a diverse range of researchers, which reflects, I suppose, the way in which DCU has changed too, but also our strength and the diversity of our crew, and the gender point that the Admiral made at the outset. I'm very pleased that Jivan Tishotti is the director of the Ireland India Institute as a contributor. Livia Margna, who's DCU student on our prestigious international masters in security, intelligence and strategic studies. And of course, Cornelia is with us at the table, who's formerly a postgraduate researcher here at the university and is now affiliated to our Institute for International Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation. So on behalf of those of us who will read the review, I'd like to congratulate all of the authors, but especially the editors. That editing is a thankless pursuit, and I just acknowledge that, and to call out especially our two editors, Dr. Katrina Dowd from the DCU School of Law and Government, who, as the Admiral said, is the first female co-editor of the journal, and Lieutenant Commander Paul Hegarty. So congratulations to you both on this very significant contribution to study. Of course, one of the strengths of Óglaigh na hÉireann, of course, is that very strong research culture. That really cuts across the whole organisation. In my own area, history, of course, we've got military history and we've got the Journal and Custom Tour and so on. But beyond that, you can see it all the time. Even if you follow the Defence Forces Twitter feed, you can see all those, apart from showing off their ships, doing amazing things in the Atlantic. All that will change when the new man arrives. But apart from that, even this morning, for instance, a tweet about collaboration between the Navy and UCC. So that culture goes right through the organisation, and it's manifest in the journal. So congratulations on that. We bring at DCU a strength to this area, and it's that strength, I suppose, the depth that makes the relationship between ourselves and the Defence Forces credible and, I suppose, continuous. In the School of Law and Government, we have expertise in security studies, terrorism studies, peace and conflict, and international security. We also host the Institute for International Conflict Resolution and Reconstruction, which was opened by Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, and we have the Brexit Institute as well. So we contributed across the board in terms of EU foreign policy, defence policy, counter-terrorism, and as I say, some of the newer threats, cybersecurity and online radicalisation. And that research is kind of infused in our programmes, and the International Masters in Security and Intelligence and Strategic Studies, which we deliver with the University of Glasgow and Charles University in Prague, is a reflection of that. So again, if we look specifically at the theme, the global island, we like to think of ourselves in Ireland as a global island, and we are in fact a global island. But as the Admiral said again, that the implications of that are complicated and complex, that on one level, of course, it demonstrates our strength. It demonstrates really the ability of a small island off another island, off a continent, to play a disproportionate role in global affairs, whether it's in peacekeeping or even as reflected in our election to the Security Council. All of those are important. But there's also a kind of a vulnerability in that island piece. And I'm sure that kind of exposure and the challenges of being an island with a long coastline, as I say, in the gateway to Europe and the continent, will be discussed today. But it is an exciting lineup. Again, I'd just like to thank all those who contributed to the success of this publication. I'd like again to call out Paul Hegarty. I'd like again to single out as well the staff of the Public Relations Branch of the Defence Forces, my colleagues here in DCU and Law and Government who collaborated on the review, and ultimately the authors who will kind of provide food for thought for our discussion today. So, Gurv Mila Óglaigh and Ganargu live in you with this discussion. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Keogh. Very much appreciate the kind words and the help and support that DCU have given us this year, particularly with getting the reviewing of the academic pieces done by your staff. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the co-editor of this year's review, Dr. Katrina Dowd, who will be moderator for this morning's panelists and the Q&A session that will follow. Thank you.
Professor Dara, thanks very much for your support also. And just before Katrina comes in, just to say, I really admire your extraordinary leadership in diversity and inclusion, gender equality and empowerment of women. I've made a point for many years the extraordinary relationship between the gender gap and interstate and intrastate violence. And it behoves us all, not just in the West, but in particular in terms of countries where the gender gap is characterised by oppression, by lack of education, and by lack of opportunities in the labour market, that should be closed, because that is one of the major drivers for insecurity globally. Thanks once again, Dara, and we look forward to catching up.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to the Admiral and to Professor Keogh for their remarks this morning. It's my pleasure to introduce and moderate our panel of esteemed experts this morning, and I'm delighted to have with us 4 of the contributors to today's review. They are Mr. Michael O'Sullivan, who will be speaking about his contribution on Highway 10, cocaine's silk route to Europe, Dr. Cornelia Batcheu on assessing the strategic implications of the triple lock for Ireland's democratic control of the armed forces and engagement in international peace missions in a context of geopolitical competition. Brigadier General Tony Cudmore will be speaking on integrating our national security and defence capabilities, a more comprehensive response to evolving challenges. And we'll conclude with Her Excellency Ambassador Riley Lanalampi, who will speak on security in the digital age, the Finnish experience. It's my pleasure to invite our speakers to speak and present their papers, after which we will open to Q&A, and please do send in your questions using the webinar function, and we look forward to a lively discussion and to addressing those as we proceed through the morning. So to begin, I'll introduce our first speaker, Mr. Michael O'Sullivan. Mr. O'Sullivan was appointed to the Executive Director of the Maritime Analysis and Operations Centre for Narcotics in 2017, having previously been an Irish member of the Executive Board and a former Assistant Commissioner in An Garda Síochána. During his career, he developed extensive expertise in drug enforcement and had responsibility for national investigations into drugs and organised crime. Mr. O'Sullivan is a qualified barrister at law and has a wide range of academic qualifications, including an MBA from UCD and an MSc from Queen's University Belfast. He co-authored the article Highway 10, Cocaine's Silk Route to Europe in this year's review, and I'll hand over to you, Michael. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm the Director of the Maritime Analysis Operations Centre. Most people have never heard of it, and I'm just by way of background. It's a multi-agency task force based in Lisbon in Portugal, and it is staffed by both, unique from the perspective that it's staffed by both law enforcement and military personnel. Our remit as a task force is to coordinate with the 7 European member countries and America's Drug Enforcement Agency to coordinate the interception of drug shipments coming primarily from South America and indeed from North Africa. I suppose just to give a few statistics, this year, with the help of our naval colleagues throughout Europe, we have managed to intercept some 26 vessels coming from a variety of places, primarily South America, and have seized a little over 2 billion euros worth of controlled drugs. I suppose when you look at the market in Europe, which is estimated to be 13 billion euros for cocaine alone, when you look at the fuel that cocaine and its finances gives to organized crime, one only has to look at the deaths and the disruption, which is rapidly increasing in every European country over the last number of years. There's a huge cocaine growth, there's a huge cocaine market, and there's massive cocaine production. And that's effectively where we and the naval services come in. We focus on, I suppose, upstream disruption. We've learned to our cost that the best way of getting the largest amount of drugs is when it's at its most vulnerable, which is when it's been transported from the supply country, i.e., for example, South America, and before it lands on European shores. When it lands on the shores, within a matter of hours, it's dispersed throughout Europe, and so it makes it more difficult to apprehend large quantities and takes much more effort. Indeed, it takes a lot of effort to find that needle in a haystack in the North Atlantic, and that's the Navy's job, and have it intercepted. Again, to put it in perspective, Ireland has had quite a lot of success in seizing cocaine and arresting drug dealers over the last number of years, and I would estimate roughly in the last 5 or 6 years, Ireland has seized about a ton of cocaine. Well, if one yacht is intercepted out in the North Atlantic, it contains on average a ton to a ton and a quarter of cocaine. So that puts in perspective the number of vessels, the amount of time, effort and energy it takes over a number of years to get that large quantity. Because of the market, because of new market trends, because of a variety of reasons, indeed probably market growth, larger quantities, much larger quantities of cocaine are being brought in from South America, brought in large ships in multi-ton loads and offloaded to what we would regard as go-fast, which are speedboats or fishing trawlers at various points, mostly in the past off the European coast. So the challenge is getting greater. Vice Admiral Mellett mentioned chess and checkers. Well, it's very much a chess and checkers situation from where we stand. Over the years, with the large number of vessels being intercepted, and I have to stress, we don't intercept them all. We're like the fishermen who'd say the one that got away, and a lot do get away for a whole variety of reasons. But because of the success of the navies of Europe, particularly in the vast coastline of Europe, the transnational organized criminals have diverted a lot of their efforts to coming further south. And there's greater utilization of the 10-degree line of latitude stretching from Brazil towards the west coast of Africa. While it's much further from Europe, it is seen as Europe's weak link. It is seen as that black hole, and more vessels are beginning to take that route. It presents a number of challenges. It forces the European law enforcement and the European navies to look further south, to place their assets and their vessels in line with the trafficking route of the drug traffickers. In particular, when you look at routes around off the coast of West Africa, the modus operandi is to bring the drugs close to West Africa, to have them offloaded, sometimes landing in West Africa, and more often than not going up along the West African coast and then into southern Europe. Last year, we had a number of significant developments. There was a seizure of approximately 9 tons, which is approximately 780 million euros worth of cocaine on a vessel off the coast of Cape Verde. Cape Verde finds itself in a very strategically valuable position for law enforcement. The drugs we feel were destined to be offloaded close to Cape Verde and to be passed on then to Europe and disseminated. We feel the planning behind a lot of this is that a number of national criminal groups get together, forming this international consortium to get the drugs to shore and then divide them up among the various countries. So there was some 10 people arrested during this seizure, and it was the largest maritime seizure in maritime history. Another development we find that they have is that they have managed to successfully do what certainly maritime experts were telling us for a number of years can't be done, and that is to sail a semi-submersible vessel, which, if you don't know, it's similar to a submarine, except it stays about a meter and a half above the waves. These vessels, narco subs is what the Americans will call them. They are frequently seized along the coast of Brazil or the Gulf Coast in an effort to bring drugs to North America. It was said that they hadn't got the capabilities or the ingenuity to bring the vessel. However, we managed to coordinate the interception this time last year of a semi-submersible. It was intercepted off the coast almost before it landed. It followed a long operation by various navies in various European countries and proved very challenging. However, an analysis of the situation indicated that the vessel traveled some 23 days with 3 people on board, carrying close to 3.5 million euros worth of drugs. We now see in the jungles of South America, they are building larger submarines, and they are building solar submarines. So again, a challenging time ahead for us, but more importantly, a challenging time ahead for the navies. In the area of Cape Verde, just a footnote on that, we noticed that in a lot of the West African countries, they have their navies, let's say, are not as strong perhaps as the European navies. So we engaged in a policy of capacity building with the Portuguese Navy and the Cape Verdean Navy, training their people to professionally board the various vessels, and they've been quite successful in the recent past. Another challenging and somewhat dangerous development we see now is the vessels that are now coming from South America. We had a recent vessel on the 1st of November, a very large fishing type vessel, steel-hulled, very capable of carrying multi-ton loads. It went on what we call the Silk Route from Brazil. And as it came close to the coast of West Africa, we coordinated its interception with the assistance of the Senegalese Navy. And just before the naval services boarded the vessel, the 3-man crew jump shipped and exploded the vessel. So it was wired with explosives, and it's a new and dangerous development which gives food for thought for the people who are training the naval boarding teams, and it brings me to reflect on the naval services and the interceptions that they do. We talk about interceptions from the control center, but it is the naval services who go out, as we can all appreciate, in the dead of night and board these vessels, not knowing what they'll find. And an interesting development, we have found that since the pandemic started, certainly since mid-March, there has been a dramatic rise in the number of vessels crossing the Atlantic. It would appear that organised crime have adopted the policy of never waste a good crisis. In a period of 48 hours, there were 4 vessels intercepted by the Spanish authorities. So it goes to show that it's an ongoing challenge, and the transnational organised group are very innovative, and as I say, They try to use every means possible. Regarding the Silk Route, we have, through a goodwill basis, we have interacted with a variety of our member country navies. We have 7 European countries attached to us, and they have sent naval detachments down to the Cape Verde area, the West African coast, in an effort to give us assistance. They have both trained the personnel in Cape Verde, as I said, and also they are absolutely vital because we don't receive much notice of where a vessel may be, and when we do, we need to know there's an asset there. So gone are the days when navies and indeed Air Corps just patrolled their own coastline for the drugs that may arrive at their coasts. It's a case that the goalposts have changed hugely, that these people are trying to come in the back door, and we have to certainly change the way we do business and the way we think about drug shipments. It is not about waiting for a yacht to land on the west coast of Ireland. It is waiting for a vessel to land at Cape Verde and to come up the coast and to come in through Spain and then to come in by truck or by other route into Ireland. With this in mind, I want to say that just to conclude, I want to say that MEOC couldn't do what we do without the assistance of the naval services and indeed the Air Corps and the various other Defence Force personnel who work with us and work in Europe. They are doing a very difficult, challenging job. It's good to see, in particular, being an Irishman and working at on a European platform, to see the quick response times of the Irish Navy, to see them get a vessel to a location in a very short time. And they, from a Western Atlantic perspective, they are the eyes and ears of law enforcement for Europe. They track and trace and assist in following vessels which are later seized hundreds of nautical miles away. I want to say a special thanks to the Irish Defence Forces for their invaluable contribution and their professionalism and their dedication, and it's great to see the work that they do. That's all. Thank you very much.
Just to say many thanks to Michael for drawing attention in particular to those new and dangerous developments and the impacts that those have and the challenges they may pose. The aim of this year's review was precisely to draw out some of those discussions about evolving tactics and particularly the impact of the pandemic and how that's changing strategy. So for those of you who've joined us, please remember to use the Q&A function to send in your questions, and we'll come to discussion after our other speakers. I'll turn now to invite Dr. Cornelia Battu to present. Dr. Battu is postdoctoral researcher at the Foreign Policy Institute of Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. Her research areas include international order, US and EU foreign policy, international organizations, civil-military relations, and strategic foresight. Dr. Battu is author of the book Civil-Military Interrelations and Global Security Governance, Strategy, Hybrid Orders in the Case of Pakistan, and co-editor with my DCU colleague John Doyle of the book Peace, Security and Defence Cooperation in Post-Brexit Europe. She completed her PhD at DCU School of Law and Government, and her contribution to this year's review is on the subject of assessing the strategic implications of the triple lock for Ireland's democratic control of the armed forces and engagement in international peace missions in a context of geopolitical competition. Thank you so much for being with us, Cornelia, and I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrina, for this very nice introduction. Today I am indeed joining from Germany, and I returned from Washington, D.C., so I'm in the process of changing universities and affiliations at the moment. That was a short update, and I'm really excited to be back in Ireland, at least virtually, on this occasion. And thank you very much to the Chief of Staff, Admiral Mark Mallet, And to DCU President Der Kirch, thank you very much, Paul and Katrina, for your editorial effort and comments with this process. And I see now my presentation is already on the screen, so I assume everybody is seeing it. Therefore, I will, okay, so we make it now full screen. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the strategic implications of the triple lock for democratic control of defense forces and international peace support missions in a context of geopolitical competition. Next slide. My research was guided and a short essay which I contributed to the Defense Forces Review, and I encourage you all to read this great publication in full length. The two research axes that guided my essay are first, what are the implications of the triple lock for Ireland's democratic control of armed forces? And second, what are the strategic implications of the triple lock for Ireland's participation in peace missions in a perilous context of great power competition? Next slide, please. Okay, so these questions are important to answer because of at least two reasons. First of all, we are witnessing tectonic shifts and competing strategic aspirations of the P5, so the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And second, the questions are important to answer because of the increasingly fragmented international consensus. So the overarching question which I had in mind when I started to write this paper was, could the triple lock prevent Ireland from participating in peace missions that are not formally mandated by the United Nations? And what you can see now on the screen is the number of vetoes in the UN Security Council by P5 in the period 1990-2020. And you can observe that, for example, France and the UK have not exerted their veto right from 1989. But we can observe that Russia and China, for example, have used and exerted their veto right much more often in the last decade, which is in green, than in the previous decades. And I would say here a fun fact, if we can call it like this, is that Ireland joined the United Nations in 1955 after a Russian veto on the 1946 membership attempt in the context of the Cold War geopolitical rivalry. Next slide. And this brings me to the first predicament of this paper, which is democratic control of armed forces. Democratic control of armed forces means the subordination of the military to civilian institutions and to civilian authority, and it is a premise of democracy. So I examined the legal framework in Ireland in which this principle of democratic oversight is rooted. And we have Article 13.4 of the Constitution that stipulates that the supreme command of the defense forces is invested in the president. Then we have Articles 1, Article 5, Article 40, paragraph 4.5 that affirm the nation's sovereignty in a Westphalian legal understanding. So this means that the ultimate authority of an elected government to exert authority within a territory and have monopoly over the means of violence, including of police and armed forces. Then we have the Defence Act 1960 and its subsequent amendments and the triple lock mechanism. And these two legislative items premise Irish international deployments on UN authorization. So we could interpret that from a legal perspective that through the triple lock, the ultimate control of defense forces and whether Ireland participates in an international peace support or crisis management mission is transferred to a collective security organization, more precisely to the P5. And this brings me to at least three dilemmas, The first dilemma is that of, so it is a difficult question, I would say, to assess whether the triple lock mechanism constitutes a possible infringement to several articles of the Constitution, which I mentioned before, or even of Ireland's membership in NATO Partnership for Peace. The NATO Partnership for Peace stipulates democratic control of armed forces as a premise. And this question is, of course, difficult because as per the triple lock, the final decision on Irish deployment to international missions becomes the prerogative of the United Nations P5, the 5 permanent members, which can veto United Nations resolutions and ultimately decide on Irish international peace engagement. The second dilemma is that of accountability of the United Nations or P5. So the triple lock does not provide a mechanism to hold the United Nations accountable or P5 accountable, nor has the public any option to sanction this institution. The sanctioning function here, we need to mention, is an important function because through sanctioning, citizens can, so they can sanction their, it is a way to which they can sanction their government or, through their voting behavior, for example. And the third dilemma, I'm not sure you can see that one on the slide. The third dilemma is that of self-defense. So in a hypothetical scenario now, the question would be, would Ireland be entitled to self-defense in a context in which, let's say, its troops come under attack while being in a conflict theater, under the presumption that the mission will become an international United Nations force, but which for some reasons, for example, the resolution is blocked by one of the P5, this United Nations force is not forthcoming. So would the right to self-defense be an infringement of the triple lock mechanism? That is a question we could think about in the future. Next slide. And this brings me to the second predicament of my paper, which is the Irish support of international peace. So the white paper of 2015 acknowledges that, and I quote, that legal constraints, that the triple lock constitutes or poses legal constraints on the state sovereignty in making decisions about the use of its armed forces, and that it could prevent the state from participating in peace support operations. And the EU4 mission is given as an example, and I think the EU4 mission is perhaps the most tangible proof of the impact that the P5 can have on Irish defense, because at that time China vetoed the establishment of a UN mission based on geopolitical calculations. So the NATO allied harmony was replaced by an EU military peacekeeping mission. But this lacked UN authorization. So consequently, Ireland had to withdraw its troops from the peace mission in Macedonia. And it similarly happened in Chad in 2010. So the triple lock also applies to OCC and EU missions. And in practice, most EU missions were legally rooted in United Nations Security Council resolutions. But this is not. But this condition is not compulsory. So some missions, for example, in Mali or Somalia or Central African Republic, were established by invitation from the host government, which made the legitimate framework. Next slide. And this brings me to my conclusion, which is so as the United Nations Security Council becomes increasingly politicized or sometimes inoperable, and also in the future perhaps a place for increased great power competition, the question is, and also as missions become increasingly strategic. We could expect more EU missions outside United Nations framework in the future. So I would say this is a plausible development. And in the scenario in which EU governments would be needed to choose between contributing to a UN or to a EU mission, I would say that most governments might choose the European pole, and actually so might Ireland. And in sum, we could say that the triple lock poses several paradoxes or several dilemmas. So first, the dilemma of democratic control of armed forces, and also a paradox of Irish participation in international peace support and crisis management missions. In addition to that, it also has implications that are relevant to national security planning, and it can also constitute an obstacle in planning ahead for national defense and foreign policy because of the unpredictability of the behavior of the P5. And based on the findings of this paper, I think two recommendations which we can trace for or deduce for Ireland's United Nations Security Council non-permanent membership, which is upcoming, are two. So first, I would say that the Irish non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council is highly important, because the Irish delegation can push for reforms in the United Nations decision-making structure, which are much needed, we could say. And second, the Irish delegation could revive the role of international institutions and multilateral structures in a context of declining international institutionalism and UN primacy. International institutions and organizations are important because they can constitute building blocks of order and sources of predictability in the international security system and global order. Goemakut, that was my presentation, so I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cornelia, and particularly again reflecting on a new and emerging and changing dynamics with Ireland imminently taking up its seat on the UN Security Council, and very helpful reflections and thoughts there. I know that will generate a lot of questions and discussion, so please do continue to send your questions through the Q&A function. We've received a number already and we'll be coming to those in the discussion section. For now, however, I'm going to hand over to Brigadier General Tony Cudmore, who has over 39 years of military service, including in both United Nations and NATO peacekeeping missions. So building on, and I'm sure with many areas of overlap with our last presentation. He was appointed Brigade Commander of the 2nd Brigade of the Irish Defence Forces in 2019. He holds, among others, an MA in International Relations, an MA in Leadership, Management and Defence Studies, a postgraduate certificate in Strategic Leadership, and an MSc in Corporate Governance. His article in this year's review is on the topic of integrating our national security and defence capabilities, a more comprehensive response to evolving challenges.
Good morning. To commence, I'd like to thank Katrina and Paul for providing an opportunity to contribute to this year's Defence Forces review. The limitation on word count to 3,000 words was certainly a positive factor for me before committing myself to this endeavour. Equally, the limited word count restricts the ability to convey the ideas and the motivations that propelled me to write this essay. So my 10 minutes this morning will help me to provide that wider context. I must stress that the words, both written and spoken today, are personal and do not reflect a formal position of Óglaigh, hÉireann, the Defence Forces. My primary motivation arose from the fact that the partnership this year was with Dublin City University. I'm proud to say that I completed a Master's in International Relations with DCU in 2002, to which I can attribute an awakening and a broadening of my political and strategic perspectives, which have been instrumental in my personal development. The course commenced within months of my return from service overseas in Kosovo as part of Ireland's first contribution to the NATO Kosovo force in 1999. My service in Kosovo raised many questions for me, and the course in DCU started me on the road from the tactical through the operational and into the political strategic level in search of answers. My article in this year's Defence Forces Review is a thank you to DCU and in particular to Dr. John Doyle, my 2002 thesis supervisor, for his guidance and support on that course. John is currently Executive Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences and the Director of the Institute for International Conflict Resolution and Reconstruction. My thesis title in 2002 changed before completion because I realised that I had reached a different conclusion from that which I had commenced my studies, perhaps an indication of the level of learning that I achieved during that process. Looking back on that title, Will Defence Lead Ireland's National Security Agenda in the 21st Century? Reminds me of how optimistic I was in my earlier days. The thesis commenced by referring to what to me was an interesting anomaly. The Department of Defence Annual Report 2001 had stated, quote, "The security of the state has national or internal and international aspects. Internal security is primarily the responsibility of the Garda Síochána, with the Defence Forces playing a key role in providing, on request, aid to the civil power. The Minister for Foreign Affairs has overall responsibility for international security policy, and the role of the Minister for Defence and the Defence Organisation is essentially a supportive one, although increasing in importance." End of quote. I was fortunate in that a shorter and more focused version of this thesis was accepted for publication in the very first Defence Forces Review that was produced in 2003, a copy of which I have retained. And this copy of Volume 1, as you can see, consisted of 78 pages, and 6 of the 8 articles were written by members of the Defence Forces. The current Volume 17 shows greater advancement and diversity, not only through integration with DCU, but in the number of articles, 28 of which only 11 are authored by Defence Force members. And hopefully you'll get an appreciation of the amount of work that has gone into the two. So credit to Paul and to his predecessors on continuing the Defence Review tradition. As time passed, my experience broadened, and my next Masters in 2007 explored the potential for developing strategic leadership within the Defence Forces. My conclusion was that such education had to be integrated with external parties in order to reach strategic levels of understanding. In the case of Ireland, namely on Garda Síochána, or police force, and the Department of Foreign Affairs. I subsequently served for 3 years within the Department of Foreign Affairs permanent representation to the European Union in Brussels, where I was able to put my theory into practice on a daily basis. In studying strategic leadership, I had learned the importance of understanding alternative perspectives and of the potential for leading without authority when circumstances so warranted. Participating in the evolution of ESDP to CSDP and observing developments since has allowed me to understand the lessons that can be learned from such evolution and its relevance here in Ireland. My article on the subject of Ireland's 2013 presidency of the Council of the European Union, supporting the development of CSDP, which was published in the 2013 Defence Forces Review, responded to the question posed by John Doyle, in fact, on the same topic in the 2012 edition of the review. The title of my article in the current Defence Forces Review, which again changed before final submission, is simply, "Can we integrate our national security and defence capabilities in a more comprehensive manner to prepare against evolving challenges?" Some readers might observe a wordplay or juxtaposition of the words integrate and comprehensive in the title, and wonder if they perhaps unconsciously acknowledge the slow advancement from the comprehensive approach as proposed in the 2003 European Union Security Strategy to the integrated approach as championed in the 2016 European Union Global Strategy. But the intent is clear from the title. This article refers to national security and defence capabilities and does not intend to focus on developments within the European Union, except perhaps as a benchmark. Evolving challenges, they are not specified and thus open to the uncertainty that comes from not knowing which threat is of greatest significance, much as we have learned from the arrival of COVID-19 to Ireland. My DCU thesis in 2002 did refer to the threat from infectious diseases, amongst others, but made no reference to hybrid threats. Perhaps because hybrid was not yet the novel description for a challenge which has always been with us. The ability of your enemy to use every opportunity within your society as a potential vulnerability, and to adapt and adjust to exploit through whatever new developments and technologies such as social media that have become available in that society. The article itself does focus on the challenges associated with hybrid conflict and the requirement for an integrated response against all elements of society. The COVID-19 pandemic could be considered a rehearsal for such a requirement. Indeed, on Tuachtarán, our President Higgins has described it as a rehearsal for doomsday. Subsequent review may show how well we have responded to it, but the lessons learned should always assist the search for any improvements that are possible to achieve. This includes the potential for consideration of a more integrated strategy for such challenges. The article makes brief reference to the academic discussion on the definition of hybrid conflict. Because of my current appointment as Brigade Commander of 2 Brigade, with a wide area of responsibility, I have avoided reference to matters of defence policy or to information that may be deemed classified in the essay. Instead, I refer to the open source material available from the 2020 European Union Security Union Strategy to provide evidence on how hybrid threats have been incorporated into security planning within Europe. In addition, I refer to the work of the Swedish Defence Commission, which has recently published 2 reports. One, Resilience, the Total Defence Concept and the Development of Civil Defence, and the second, Security Policy and the Development of Military Defence. I must acknowledge that Finland has since 2012 had a government decision in relation to comprehensive security. The essay continues by reviewing the significance of the creation of the Office of Emergency Planning within the Department of Defence, following the 9/11 attacks in the USA. This was followed by the establishment of the Government Task Force on Emergency Planning, and more recently, the formation of the National Security Analysis Centre within the Department of An Taoiseach, our Prime Minister. All of these measures have enhanced the potential for integration, and in the essay, it is proposed that the development of a hybrid fusion cell, as has happened in the European Union, could be a focal point for hybrid threat assessments within the National Security Analysis Centre. This would be beneficial to both protecting against hybrid threats and building national resilience. The government proposal to develop a national security strategy is an important opportunity to ensure that hybrid threats are considered in a whole of government approach to national security. There is also an opportunity for the Commission on the Defence Forces in 2021 to consider if a greater primary role for the defence community in response to hybrid threats would constitute a timely and natural evolution beyond the current supporting role through aid to the civil power and aid to the civil authority tasks. My essay concludes that the Defence Forces Military College could serve as the central point for cross-departmental strategic leadership education on the issue of national security and hybrid threats. This may result in greater integration of the work of the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces with other state and community actors, leading to enhanced economies and efficiencies for the state, enabling the defence, in the strategic sense, to lead without authority. And that concludes my brief this morning. I look forward to your questions in the question and answer session afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And again, another presentation and discussion that highlighted key evolving threats and changes and the impact and the effect that those may have on us. A reminder that for those of you who are joining us, please remember you can continue to send through your questions. We're coming close to the discussion portion of our event today, so please use the Q&A function and we'll bring together our speakers for those discussions shortly. Before we do, however, I'd like to hand over to our final speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Riley Lahanalampi, Ambassador of Finland to Ireland, who previously served as the Chief of Cabinet for the Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2015 to 2019. In her role, she was responsible for the foreign and security policy and for relations with other ministries, state administration, and representatives of other countries. Ambassador Lahanalampi has held various international positions, has pursued a diplomatic career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for over 10 years, and has served as an advisor to the Secretary General of the OECD and to President of the UN General Assembly, His Excellency Harri Holkeri. Her contribution to this year's review is on a very topical issue, security in the digital age, and sharing her reflections on the Finnish experience. Ambassador Lahanalampi, I'd hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Paul, and congratulations for this launch. I'm very pleased to be part of that. And thank you for my co-panelists for very interesting presentations this morning. I guess we would have enough to discuss based on those three, but I will give you a virtual issue now, since we are all virtual this morning here. And I will turn to the security in the digital age, and I will reflect some of the Finnish experiences that we have. As we have seen today and before, our daily lives are increasingly dependent on ICT and technology. And with the Internet of Things, cyber threats will be linked to the everyday life at home, being it coffee making in the morning or putting on the tea kettle in the evening. So ensuring cybersecurity will start from home, like most of the important things start from home. As has been mentioned this morning already, COVID-19 has given a huge push for remote working, distance learning, digital public services such as e-health. And to protect the privacy and data security and information security will be an important part of advancing these also in the future. When we think about cyber, we should think that resilience is the key. Since 100% cybersecurity, it is not possible, given the speed of the technological development and malware and the emergence of new hackers. European security is so heavily dependent on cyber resilience. And this is also the case here in Ireland, where about 30% of European cloud data is stored. Ireland, in fact, is Europe's data center, with Amazon, Google, Microsoft leading the list of over 50 data centers here. This means also that we Finns have a vested interest in high-level cybersecurity in Ireland, since our digital lives are stored here. As highly digitalized countries and economies, Finland and Ireland have shared interest in building secure cyberspace. We need to foster stronger partnerships and strengthen our capabilities to prevent, deter, and respond to these threats. The role of states as providers of security and well-being of the people is inherently linked to how prosperity is accumulated. The nexus between development and security, as has been discussed this morning, is an old concept, but it has a new complexity in the integrated world economy. The present competition for technological hegemony between China and the USA is symptomatic of the situation. Smaller states need to be innovative in how to manage the new situation. Greater attention, I believe, needs to be paid on how to support digital expertise and cybersecurity at the EU and international level. Digital revolution must go hand in hand with cybersecurity. Finland joined the EU 25 years ago for very traditional security reasons. Now our challenge is to secure production chains and promote EU's digital agenda and legislation in areas such as cybersecurity and certification. Things have changed. In my paper, I argue that in a digitalized world, where hybrid and cyber threats are the new reality, a whole of society approach is necessary to counter these threats. In Finland, we approach this challenge through so-called concept of comprehensive security. Before we go to that, a few words about Finland's digital strengths as basis for better cybersecurity. We have very long digital history promoted by public commitment to technology and private innovation, and the ongoing cooperation between these two. So today, no wonder Finland ranks high in international digital surveys. This is the case in terms of the scope and quality of online services, status of telecommunication infrastructure, and existing human capacity and digital public services. What seems to be important for these achievements is that various stakeholders in our society work together as a team. Human capital is one of Finland's strongest competitive advantages, with almost 80% of the population having basic or above basic digital skills. We also lead in participation of women in the digital economy. And I'm very happy that the Chief of Staff also mentioned the gender aspect in providing better security. And this is certainly the case in digital security. All these human skills are crucial for society to advance. Moreover, they are an important enabler for effective training to prevent cyber attacks. So how do we go about concretely to ensure cyber resilience? One of the key objectives is to enhance cooperation between the public and private sector. Given that digital tools are mainly in the hands of the private sector, this is actually a basic requirement for success. It is also important to educate people about these new technologies. And as part of our EU presidency last year, Finland introduced and launched a free online course on elements of artificial intelligence. Our goal is to educate 1% of Europeans in the basic AI. This online course was also launched here this October, here in Ireland. Recent 5G discussion have shown that there is a need to review the whole supply chain and better identify the subcontractors, the so-called vendors and suppliers, in order to monitor their cybersecurity solutions and possible risks involved. For Finland, the foundation for Finnish cybersecurity lies on our tradition of comprehensive security. This is a concept created already in 1950s, so it's a long tradition. And what it means is it's a cooperation model for preparedness of the Finnish society to secure the vital functions of society. These functions are, of course, economy, defense, security of supply, and others. Within this collaborative framework, actors from all fields of society share and analyze information, prepare joint plans in advance, and perhaps most importantly, train together. This system requires a high degree of trust between all actors, and in particular, it requires citizens' trust of authorities, which is so important today. Joint approaches are fostered through regular exercises and training, as I mentioned. An excellent example here is the National Defense Courses, which facilitate networking between civil servants, politicians, business people, NGOs, academics, in order to show how our society would work together during the crisis. Our current cybersecurity strategy was adopted last year. And this also underlines the close cooperation between authorities and the business sector. The idea here is that without this cooperation, the state would not be able to keep up with the latest technology and developments. And the payback for the business sector is a strong cybersecurity, providing a secure investments environment. In addition, for this cybersecurity space in Finland, we have some basic structures in the Finnish society that support this. A well-functioning and non-corrupt bureaucracy is an intangible niche for us. A high-quality and free education system enables widespread teaching of basic ITC skills and also promotion of cyber awareness. And through our conscription army, our defense forces recruit young ICT experts and immerse them in the military dimension of cyber. And after that, they are retained in our military reserve while they continue to work in a wide spectrum of digital society. We have many challenges, but I only mentioned 3 here. The first one is political challenge. We would need a long-term, holistic way of looking at things in cybersecurity. And this would require and requires vision and political leadership and investment also in long-term projects that actually might be credited by the political rivals in the coming years because of our very short political election cycles. The second challenge is management challenge. The physical core structures of our societies rely heavily on digital networks, and it is difficult to separate physical and digital security. Therefore, cybersecurity should be part of every aspect of security in our societies. And the third challenge is capacity. Capacity building needs to be a priority given the rapid technology development and recruitment challenges. In Finland, a strong ecosystem of cybersecurity and top-notch cybersecurity companies such as Badrap, F-Secure, Hoxnant, Nixu, SSH, together with highly qualified academic research, are needed to provide our up-to-date expertise on the topic. But I believe a concern for the whole Europe is losing a competitive edge in cybersecurity, given that many or most majority of the vendors are non-European. So this means that the EU needs to build stronger investments program, support innovation, and build up sufficient demand in the European single market. To conclude, I believe Finland has core strengths that are well suited for cybersecurity. Keeping our comprehensive security system effective, investing in research, providing a conducive environment for cybersecurity startups, and working with partners such as Ireland, Finland will remain a net contributor to security in Europe, also in the digital age. Ireland is Europe's data center, as I mentioned. This highlights the need for cybersecurity. The Finnish experiences in cybersecurity and the nexus to comprehensive security concept might provide an interesting perspective for Irish policymakers. And Finland and Ireland have shared interest in building a secure cyberspace. Strengthening multilateralism and the rules-based system is in the interest of both countries, as in working together for more comprehensive approaches. So I believe Finland and Ireland would both stand to benefit from closer cooperation on cybersecurity, whether between companies, researchers, or between policymakers. Mille Mahagat. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lachlan Lampi, Gurv Mila Mahagat, and Gurv Mila Mahagat Galair, to our panelists who all shared on different aspects of the evolving geopolitical situation and the challenges that they pose. We're delighted as well to have received a number of questions from our audience today, from those who've joined us. And with that, I'll turn to one of our first questions, while others among you might continue to use the Q&A function and send in your queries. But returning to you, Michael, Miriam Hurley was prompted by your remarks to ask, is it time for Ireland to take a more enhanced role in the fight against illegal narcotics by not alone collaborating with other EU navies, but also in support and training of lesser developed navies? Perhaps your thoughts on that capacity building or sharing and the value that that might add.
Yeah, I suppose capacity building is essential. We engage in it with the Portuguese Navy, who have very good contacts down in Cape Verde. A lot of the West African countries could do with capacity building and would relish the assistance given by some of the European navies. Absolutely, it's about upskilling these people to assist us in Europe's fight against drug trafficking. And the more naval services, defence forces can lend assistance to these countries, the better. The Belgians, who aren't members of the MEOC group, however, they do a lot of work with us, they have gone down frequently to train a lot of the people down in Cape Verde. So yeah, capacity building is essential, because that's really where the new battle is. For the battle of organised crime bringing drugs to Europe is down around those West African countries. And if they're not up to speed, and if they're not successfully upskilled, well, then we are at a disadvantage. As I said earlier, we trained up the Cape Verdean military, and within a few weeks of their training, they were successfully boarding vessels. So it's very necessary. We take the training, I think, in Europe for granted because of maybe the resources and the professionalism of the defence forces in Europe. The same resources aren't down in West Africa, and we need to look at that. No doubt about it, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those remarks and highlighting that importance of capacity sharing and capacity building, and turning perhaps to another question in our Q&A that also highlights this global focus, looking beyond Ireland alone and its engagement on the global stage. Dr. Batchu, Anna Sofia Sorante of the Embassy of Finland asks, beyond the triple lock on which you'd presented, could you reflect on some of the issues that can be agreed regarding peace-building missions more generally? In other words, in a context of changing geopolitical competition, are there still universal values in this changing geopolitical space regarding peace-building? Thank you.
Question. This is a very valid question, and so we need to think that the United Nations was established after the Second World War with the aim of providing collective security and stability in the world order. So in order to prevent a future war. And I would say that the United Nations P5, so the permanent members, the consensus of the permanent members in the P5 format was a symbol of international cooperation that showed that international cooperation is possible. And if great powers can agree on the priorities and on what are the universal values, then things are fine, and then they can progress. Now, what we have seen recently is a transition from a great power consensus to a great power competition. And we will need somehow to find out what is the model of getting back to returning to that grand consensus between the great powers. And what are the universal values? So I would say that one issue of content which we have witnessed, if we analyze the foreign policy positions of the great powers and also of other countries in the United Nations, is the international use of force. So this is something on which there is lack of consensus, even in Europe, I would say. Under Chapter 7, when should the United Nations intervene or not? We have seen, of course, responsibility to protect principle and just war theory, but still, when it comes to its applicability in practice, this is not that easy. Also because I would say conflicts might affect P5 in a variable manner. So the implications of, I would say, let's take an example, the implications of the conflict in Syria or Libya for Europe might be different than the implications of this war for, I don't know, let's say China or other countries. So this variation in the implications on the P5 might also be a source of disagreement. Now, I would say to make a prediction for the future or a sort of anticipation, we could anticipate a change in the policy position of the United States with the coming of the President-elect Joe Biden to power, and there are hopes for Joe Biden restoring the so-called Pax Americana, and because we know that he's a supporter of multilateralism and a rules-based international order, which is also a premise for, of course, is a premise for trade, for international exchange, for mobility, for development aid, and so on. So the bottom line, I would say, is that a premise for a grand power consensus or great power consensus is a common threat perception. And this can relate to climate change, to artificial intelligence and emerging security technologies, which have an increasing implication for democratic control of states in sovereign domains such as security and defense. So, and the second is the use of international force. So we will need to have an agreement on that. Would be a premise for seeing agreement between the P5. Also, I would give an example of the pandemic, which I would say it showed the need, or it demonstrated the need for international cooperation to mitigate uncertainty. So if competition will continue to escalate and we will soon see an international order which is volatile or which is resembling more a Hobbesian form of international insecurity, this will have detrimental effects on great powers as well and on everyone else. So then cooperation between great powers becomes strategic, becomes a requirement for more stability and wealth. So yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Cornelia, for that, and particularly in light of Ireland joining the UN Security Council as well, and the change that might bring. We might come back later in the discussion to the potential for Ireland to make a catalytic contribution around peace and security as well as other powers shift there. But for now, I'd like to come to General Cudmore. You spoke in your remarks very generously about your learning journey at DCU among other degrees you've undertaken. And a question we've received from Brendan Flynn, who welcomes your ideas on the role of the military college in educating wider government, asks, would you agree that there is a need in Ireland for an increase in defence and security literacy for a better understanding by both wider government and the general public, specifically on hybrid threats, but perhaps to go further on the role of the defence forces and the changing geopolitical context? I'll turn to you, General Cudmore.
Thank you very much. Yeah, an excellent question, and I think if I could rephrase what Ambassador Lana Lempi has mentioned, the role of the Defence Academy in Finland to provide a mechanism whereby it brings together and shares the ideas of the different departments, the different civil servants, the different public sector members who will have a responsibility to respond to those types of hybrid threats, which will impact right across all elements of society. So yes, certainly, I think that there's potential there. I think The Military College has had a very long tradition of serving both the education and the training of personnel within the Defence Forces. And I think that there's potential, having been a former commandant of the Military College, and recognising that the resources are limited, but nonetheless the development of the Institute of Peacekeeping and Leadership Training, which is on the plan and hopefully will continue to get reinforcement, might provide a mechanism whereby we could pull together, and it's not necessarily it's defence speaking to the rest of the community, it's actually defence facilitating that conversation. And I think that conversation, bringing together the practitioners, bringing together the academics and the various other strands of community and society, I think there's a huge opportunity there. And again, I think we can leverage our experience overseas. It's interesting that in our overseas missions, we effectively provide the foundation for the safe security of the society, but we also provide some of our technical skills, whether they're medical or engineering, or obviously our communication skills. The Defence Forces, because of its nature, of its combined force and joint nature, brings an awful lot of capability to the table. And we'd be very happy, I think, looking forward to sharing these with other elements within and right across government.
Thank you. And on that note, you mentioned the parallels and echoing what Ambassador Lachlan Lampi had remarked around human capital, innovation, and Ambassador, you mentioned research and diverse stakeholders working together as part of that contribution that Finland makes and as part of developing that capacity. Part of the mission, I suppose, of the Defence Forces Review and what we're hoping to achieve today is bringing together research, policy and defence professionals in that dialogue and in that discussion. And I wondered whether you see particular opportunities or perhaps persistent gaps that have not been addressed, where further research, evidence and learning could add value in shaping security planning, whether in the cyber domain or more widely. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you. And thank you for all these questions. They are very important. I would like to discuss also the UN and the triple lock and everything, having worked there, but more on cyber and hybrid. I'm no big expert on this. I have interviewed experts in Finland, and of course from the policy side, I have some experience. And I think the Finnish model was based, as I said, this comprehensive security after the Second World War in the 50s, and the whole nation came together during the Second World War, and I believe that somehow gave the impetus for working together at national, regional, like you would say here, county and municipal level, and that has sustained. The new security environment has brought the academics much closer to this. One of the persons I interviewed was Teija Tiilikainen, who is now leading the EU NATO Hybrid Center, which is the Center of Excellence, which is located in Helsinki. Noted that, for example, the risks of AI, artificial intelligence, they were too long unknown and undiscussed. Somehow I think that is also related to the question of that we need to even harder working together with the research and academic community, and also putting more on the curriculum at education level on hybrid, because disinformation, as we learn every day, every minute, disinformation is very strong and has a huge impetus through the social media. So we need factual information, and I think there researchers and academia, universities are very important bringing this together. Another aspect is that business, of course, in many countries in Ireland, I think more so works together with academia on cyber, on technology. It's all interrelated, so this all needs to go hand in hand also with cybersecurity. And I believe that we as government, civil servants, we need to be much more open in terms of looking at that we are working as a whole of society. Nobody knows for sure anymore on either side what the future will bring. In my paper, I kind of refer back to the fact that for many years, decades, many white papers on security have had pandemia as one of the threats, and still we were not prepared, because this means that we should have invested more in preparedness, and that's very difficult in the very short life cycles of our governments. So there, I think if we have better cooperation with academia, researchers, we can also kind of, in a way, bring the politicians closer to the facts, so that we can be more prepared. And I think this also relates to the whole question of organized crime, drugs. This has been discussed for decades also. Climate change is another issue. And this is all related now to digital environment, because everything is digital. So anything we discuss, any work we do is related to technology development. So there, and I should mention, I won't mention any names, but one of the CEOs of one of the very big Finnish IT firm said once in a meeting where I was present to one of our politicians that, Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Johnson, this is something you cannot delegate to your civil servants. You need to learn what is artificial intelligence, because otherwise you will not be able to legislate for it or plan for policies. And I think that was a very wise comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A question in that case, moving perhaps from leveraging that external expertise and capacity for collective and whole of society approaches to developing capabilities within the Defence Forces. And we had a question for Michael O'Sullivan from Kevin Phipps, a retired Irish Air Corps, who asks, with the threat posed by narco-terrorists, do you think there is merit and demand for the government to enhance and enlarge its maritime patrol and surveillance capabilities, both in terms of numbers, but also capability to see what's below the surface? Do you see opportunity for Ireland to contribute these surveillance assets to overseas operations, enhancing our standing as a good global citizen to combat this threat? Your thoughts on that, Michael, if you think there's an opportunity or a potential specific contribution that Ireland could make there?
Yeah, Ireland is presently making that contribution, but there's certainly more that Ireland can do, and perhaps with greater resources, perhaps to the Air Force. But certainly, when I talk about navies and I talk about interceptions, the first thing you do in an operation is look to see, can you get a plane in the air to try and locate this vessel. As I say, it's needle in a haystack stuff based on a lot of investigative work. And one of the first sightings is by a plane, and it is the information and got from that plane that triggers the operation or confirms that the investigation is going in the correct direction. So it is essential. The capability, the Air Force capabilities of each nation is essential. And it is certainly, we found it in particular in dealing with some vessels that even the Air Corps were challenged in tracking them, particularly in relation to the semi-submersibles. And yeah, it's vital. Their role is vital. Also, I think that if you want to say the cross-pollination of experience between the various agencies, working on that international platform, certainly from my former role, from a policing perspective, you pick up a lot from other police forces and they pick up a lot from you. So certainly meeting up with people who have done similar operations and have made mistakes in operations, and we don't always get it right. There's great learning there, there's great experiential learning. So the more interaction between, I would say, in meeting with and networking with other defence forces in the fight against organised crime is essential. I see it from the policing perspective. We hold regular post-operative briefings in operations down at Merck. Some with operations that were successful, some with operations that weren't successful, and we learn a lot. We learn a lot from the experienced frontline personnel who discuss what went wrong or what went right or what they would do again. And that experiential learning is invaluable. That networking, that putting all those people in the one room and the level of information and experience that they walk away from. Also the contacts that they make, the networking that they make, that they can pick up a phone and speak to an opposite number about a particular challenge they have. I see it at first hand. We have, as I said, it is unique, I think, for agencies to have both law enforcement and military personnel working under the one roof. They both learn off each other and they learn from their colleagues in other countries. So the more cooperation in international operations, the more people attend these post-operational briefings, certainly the greater the learning for everybody, because we all come across the same mistakes and we come across the same challenges. So it's yeah. In conclusion, it's very important that interactivity between both police forces and defence forces. Yes, that's it.
Thank you so much. And I'm conscious that we have heard from a number of speakers on the importance of that experiential learning, that shared collaboration, and the value that comes from bringing diverse stakeholders together. Ambassador Lana Lampi talked about the whole of society approach. You mentioned the value in that experiential learning. And I wondered, General Cudmore, you also spoke about a whole of government approach, and in perhaps zooming out a little and thinking about the broader picture, do you see particular opportunities or actions that could be taken to strengthen that whole of government approach? For instance, around a coordinated learning or coordinated training at a national level, or other opportunities to bring diverse stakeholders from policy, security and research together?
Certainly, Katrina, I think that there certainly is potential for us to improve. I'm very happy to say that the relationships are so good. Perhaps being a small island, perhaps our natural tendency towards engaging with other people, I think we're quite open to working across departmental and across agency. And I think Michael has referred there, in a sense, how it's becoming the norm across Europe that there is that level of engagement. I think we can look to what's happening outside of Ireland, and we can also take the lessons we've learned from our own history to see how we can actually enhance that communication, where necessary, putting in place the benefits of structure, which could come in the form of certain level of education. And referring back to the previous query from Brendan, the benefits of education, whether in the Finnish model, where perhaps you might be considering teaching school children their responsibilities as part of a national resilience policy, or whether we're talking about particularly educating civil servants and broadening and understanding at Secretary General level of how different departments can have an impact on one another and how we need to bring together an understanding. So I think that educational piece is absolutely the first step in relation to the understanding. But coming from that will certainly be a greater appreciation then of where perhaps there are gaps in our policies and perhaps in our procedures. And I think very, very often an enemy will be able to perceive, will be able to identify. It's quite natural, they will look for your vulnerabilities, which are very often around the gaps. And the gaps are around the traditional tendency to silo or to stovepipe. In other words, that we remain within the area that we're most comfortable. So we as public servants, we have to be prepared to share with our other colleagues and get a greater understanding. And I would be very confident that by even starting this conversation, you're actually starting to broaden the understanding, and hopefully it will be a step towards a greater understanding right across all parts of the community, that we all have a responsibility. And one of the tragedies of the pandemic COVID-19 experience has been that there has been a lot of death and there's been a lot of displacement and persons have lost their jobs. But we have to look at what we can learn from that. And I think one of the lessons is that we have to work together as a community. And I think this could be translated or transferred across to the wider defence and security environment, bringing the learning from the COVID-19 experience into how we're going to do things in the future, how we're going to cooperate better, how we're going to communicate better. And fundamentally, that in itself is the first step towards building your stronger society, which is the purpose of your defence and security community.
Thank you very much. And I think it brings together in those remarks a lot of the learning and the comments that a number of our speakers have made around the value of that collaboration and shared cooperation. Cornelia, there's a question perhaps less on the value of shared cooperation, but some of the entanglements that you mentioned and some of the dilemmas that are presented by those multi-scalar kind of institutions and engagement in different domains. David Barry asks, is the UN Security Council resolution requirement that you spoke about a particular issue for CSDP missions, which Ireland otherwise supports? And he cites the example of Ireland deploying a ship to the Mediterranean during the migrant crisis, but being unable to join the EU NAVFOR Operation Sophia until a relevant resolution was agreed a significant time later. Was that resolution relevant to the needs or facts of the situation where we had already otherwise committed, except to satisfy the triple lock? So perhaps that particular example of interaction and engagement at CSDP missions, if you had thoughts on that.
Thank you very much for this is a very important question. And I would like to emphasize that that Ireland had an important contribution for the EU naval mission in the Mediterranean, Sophia. And I know that Ireland contributed with a naval vessel. And also I was lucky last year to learn that Irish naval vessels are named after Irish poets. I learned this from the Irish ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Daniel Mulhall. So I thought this is interesting. The successor of the EU Mediterranean Operation Sophia is the EU mission hÉireann, at which Ireland will also contribute, as far as I know, not with a naval vessel, but with military personnel. And now to come to the particular question, there is no EU mission. It's not compulsory for EU missions to be rooted in a EU or to be authorized by a United Nations resolution. It is not. Most of the previous EU missions were based on United Nations resolution, but this is not a compulsory arrangement. So we have also seen EU missions that are, for example, were established based on the invitations by the host government to ensure this legitimacy of intervention. What we have seen is also the United Nations EU Strategic Partnership Framework, which could boost EU contributions to United Nations missions in the future. But as I said, United Nations Security Council resolution or United Nations resolution is not compulsory for EU missions and operations. So this does not exclude that the EU will have its own missions in the future, particularly on hybrid threats, as it was mentioned by Ambassador Lampi and the other speakers, as the nature of the security threats is changing, and cyber threats become increasingly pressing, I would say, and put national governments under stress. We need a crisis response structure in place. And yeah, we could think, for example, of the Center of Excellence in Helsinki. That could be a possibility of being a prime responder to such cyber threats. So this could be one example of EU own. The EU could perhaps be a prime responder. So that would be another scenario, that the EU will be a prime responder in operations, hybrid missions in the future, and then we will see a UN peacekeeping force following up on that. Now we will have to figure out how exactly a UN peacekeeping force will look like in the context of a hybrid mission, so for countering hybrid threats. Then I would also like to emphasize that even if the EU missions are not authorized per se by United Nations resolutions due to some reasons, one reason or another, they are in line with United Nations principles. So I think this also makes a loop to the first question I was asked on the matter of values. So I think this is also an important item to keep in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing on a range of different areas and expertise. And I know there's crossover and overlap between our panelists' expertise and insights as well, that has distilled a real focus on the changing and uncertain nature of threats, the requirement for that whole of government, but also whole of society and cross-sectoral collaboration to address them, and a particular focus on some key areas that perhaps to date have been under-resourced or under-attended to in terms of the threat and the potential impact that they could have. Part of the theme of our review this year was around evolution and uncertainty and the evolving global threats. We're of course facing into 2021, perhaps an uncertain and unknowable global situation following a remarkable year. Ireland also has a strategic review due of the defence in 2021, and Ireland will be taking up its role on the UN Security Council, so a period of change ahead. I wanted to turn to each of our panelists for some concluding remarks, reflecting perhaps where you think the discussion, the priorities, the focus of a publication like the Defence Forces Review or the wider security studies community should be in 2021 if we were to reconvene a year from now, thinking ahead to what would be top of our agenda. And if I can, I'd like to go in reverse speaking order and give our panelists a chance to comment. So turning perhaps first to you, Ambassador Lana Lampi, for your thoughts on a year of change and uncertainty ahead. Where do you think our discussion will be?
I think the discussion, thank you very much for this opportunity to start with, and it's been a great pleasure to be part of this very distinguished panel. I'm very happy to be here. Next year is very close. Of course, before that we all wait the Santa to come from the Finnish Korvatunturi with a lot of presents. Now that Simon Coveney has said that his travels are essential and his work is essential, so he has diplomatic immunity. But more seriously, I should say that next year, hopefully we go back into more rules-based multilateral cooperation. I believe it's very difficult to really foresee what the threats will be. We know that they are related to broader spectrum, I said, because if you think about threats before, they had more narrow focus, if I would put it as a lay person this way, but now everybody is part of this chain. It's not a blockchain, but it's a chain because of the Internet of Things, because of AI, the vulnerabilities and the uncertainty has increased. So in this discussion, nobody should be left behind, and I believe that the only way forward is multilateral cooperation at international level, at European level, and also at home, like this whole of society. And I would say that not only whole of government, but whole of society, because that includes NGOs, that includes business, that includes every citizen, so to say. So that is my hope. Threats will be there. We will not be sure what they will be, but they will be impacting the whole society, or they can be impacting the whole society. So what we need is more resilience, and that is only being built, can only be built by more cooperation at all levels and by all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And to you, General Cudmore, the same question. A year from now, will we be looking at a much changed security landscape and a completely different focus in terms of threats and opportunities, or do you see some continuity in the themes and issues we've raised today?
Well, Katrina, I'll be very diplomatic and I'll agree to both. Actually, there's going to be change, but there's going to be continuity. And I think that, in a sense, the experiences that we've had right across Europe in relation to the pandemic, again, COVID-19, have brought about an opportunity for greater solidarity, for community spirit, and right down to the local level. I think it has heightened our understanding of how much we rely on each other. And I think from that, as a public servant, I certainly recognise the responsibility that we have to the citizen has never been more clear. So I think what I would see is that there's going to be an evolution to a recognition over the next 12 months of what we need to do and what we will have learned from this this tragic experience. And actually that is going to be positive. So how that will impact on our security and our defence community, suffice to say that, excuse me, there are existing good relationships, and I think we're actually developing them further, and we will bring the next generation, the younger members of our organisations, whether they're military or police or civil servant or public servants or academics or students, bringing them all to a greater level of appreciation of how much we rely on each other and how we're going to work together. And so I'm very optimistic about next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, always a pleasure to end on a note of optimism in any case. So that's very welcome, in particular between Santa and the optimism of the year ahead. I think we're wrapping up on a positive note. Cornelia, turning to you, where do you see the discussion in the security studies community and perhaps in defence, in the defence circles, particularly a year from now? Will we be still discussing the same issues, or do you think there are new issues on the horizon?
Okay, so I think from 1 year from now, more or less, to make an estimation for the future, I see both the scientific debate and the policy community debate in the area of defense studies, national security studies, focusing on those unknowns, to use a very known quote from US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld under President Ford. So I think we need to one issue of which we can trace from the discussion that we have today is the idea of uncertainty. Or an uncertainty as a variable which is affecting at global level. So I think we will need to define what focusing on those and trying to find out what those unknowns means will be one goal which will keep us busy, we scientists and also the policy community for the next years. So I think these unknowns are things which we are neither aware of nor are under our control, or we cannot understand. So I think there will be a more demand for knowledge of the future, and the aim of this is to prevent crisis. And I think the recent crisis and the strategic shocks, a context of increasing strategic shocks and mega turbulences, which we have witnessed, and which are part of the global interdependencies, and which can have this domino effect on policy. Some scholars are talking about a VUCA world, so a world which is vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, or complex, or dynamic complexity. So this evolving nature of the world order and of the system will be something which will keep busy governments from now on, I suppose, also in the light of crisis prevention. So I think crisis prevention and early warning might become a priority and is likely to become a priority of national governments. In the future, we might see strategic foresight departments being established at governments level. And I think, given the nature of the complexity of these threats and the fluidity of the implications, this kind of partnerships, civil-military partnerships, partnerships with local actors, partnerships between the scientific community and the policy community, partnerships between academia and all the others, multidisciplinary approaches to policy making could be a starting point of ensuring that we will be able to establish a system of early warning in the future, but also to ensure that early warning transfers to or becomes early action, because I think this is also important. And yeah, that's also something which we could link to our future discussions, how to ensure that early warning reports do also result in early action. So I think this is yeah, this unknowns is something which is likely to keep us busy in the next future and next years to come, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cornelia. And lastly, turning to you, Michael, for your remarks and your final thoughts on where we might be a year from now. You started us off reflecting on some of the processes of recent change, and any remarks and comments on where that trajectory might take us and what we'll be focusing on a year from now. Very welcome.
Okay, certainly. Well, firstly, I want to say it's great to be part of this panel and to be part of the launch of the publication of the Defence Forces Review. And I think it just signifies the collaboration between, you know, Defence Forces and law enforcement and academia. Everybody sort of pooling the resources and their learning. That being said, I have no doubt in a year from now, the drug problem as we see it, the power of international organised crime and indeed national organised crime will be greater. There will be more drugs sold. There will probably, I don't want to be a foreteller of doom, there will certainly be more power struggles between criminal groups which will affect society in general and certainly make them more powerful because of the amount of drugs they are currently importing and intending to import for next year. That I find that is a bit negative, but that's just a fact of life, and we can see that trajectory going up, and it's way off its peak yet. However, that having been said, I think there's a recognition among international governments, and I've seen it over the last number of years while I've been in my role. There's a recognition among the governments and the institutions, and that there's greater collaboration and between the various defence forces in various countries, and that is certainly helping Europe in its drug enforcement role. I can see greater involvement with defence forces and with a greater sharing of learning and greater assistance and collaboration between law enforcement and defence forces down the road. However, I don't think it's all bleak, but it's business for us. It's business as usual, and probably going to get busier. I suppose the only positive thing I can say is that it is easier to work when there isn't a pandemic, as is for everybody. But for the people who are on the front line, for the defence forces, for the law enforcement, it's hugely challenging. So we're looking at a very busy next year. But we're equally looking at the people that we're working with, and we're looking and getting ready for that challenge. I hope that isn't too negative. And we're looking forward to Santi as well coming. But I just said I'd throw that one in. Okay.
Thank you, and I think very appropriate to remark on both of those positive and potentially optimistic trajectories, but also the challenges ahead. And from that, of course, the even greater value of these kinds of dialogues and discussions that bring together those shared expertise and insight and collective approaches to tackling those. Thank you to all of our speakers today whose insights and reflections certainly reflected that richness of those diverse experiences and a real range of focus and an opportunity to really direct us to some key areas. And thank you to all of the authors, of course, in this year's Defence Forces Review, the other contributions of which also build on that sort of multidisciplinary and shared learning approach. Thank you for being with us, and it's my pleasure to hand back over to Paul to conclude our webinar today. Thank you.
Good morning again, and just to conclude today's webinar for the launch of the Defence Forces Review 2020. Again, just to echo Katrina's thoughts, just want to thank all of the contributors, both in the initial stages when we went from the call for papers to abstracts and then into the final 28 papers that were selected for this year's review. Each adds in its own unique way to the discourse and the narrative that's forming around the security and defence, particularly as Ireland evolves and matures as a nation. One key takeaway from my involvement in the last 2 years and the contributions from this year's papers and the panel today in particular is that the silo approach is a thing of history. It's something that we need to leave behind, and collaboration, integration and solidarity are themes and words that are echoing strongly for the future. And it'll be an interesting year in 2021 as the country and the Defence Forces move forward. Lastly, can I just remind people that the publication is available if you want to contact the Defence Forces Public Relations branch. Hard copies are available. Obviously, there is on Twitter and on the Defence Force media site links to this year's publication, and we'd commend it to anyone in the academic world or anyone who's an interest in security and defence studies. It's certainly worth reading, and other editions are available on that site. Lastly, today wouldn't be possible without the help and assistance of the Director of Communications Information Services in the Defence Forces, namely Frank Hickey and Dave McKnight have been invaluable in the last couple of days as we've prepared for this event, and obviously today running it seamlessly and making sure that all the speakers have been able to remote in and give their valuable thoughts and insights into what has been an extremely interesting and exciting webinar. Can we just take the chance on behalf of myself and Katrina to thank the people who've watched and listened and contributed with the questions that have generated the discussion today. And on that note, wish everyone all the best for the coming festive season. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2021 when the next edition of the Defence Forces Review will hopefully commence and then go to another launch, hopefully in person next year. And on that note, thanks very much and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.